At this very moment, as you're watching this video, there are tens of thousands of planes in the sky carrying millions of people across continents, oceans, time zones. And here's the part almost nobody realizes. A huge number of those planes don't actually belong to the airlines flying them. So the question is obvious. If airlines don't own their planes, then who does? And more importantly, why would they choose not to? Because at first glance, it makes no sense. An airline without planes sounds like a restaurant without a kitchen. But once you see how the system actually works, you start to understand something much bigger. Airlines aren't really in the business of owning aircraft. They're in the business of managing risk. Let's start with the obvious. Planes are expensive. Not expensive like a house. Not even expensive like a luxury yacht. We're talking about machines that cost well over $100 million for a single narrow-body jet. And if you move up to long-haul aircraft, you're easily looking at $300 million or more. Now, multiply that. Airlines don't need one plane, they need fleets, hundreds of them. Suddenly, you're not talking about millions, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars tied up in metal. And that metal starts losing value the second it leaves the factory. So even if an airline has the money, buying planes locks them into a long-term financial commitment that is incredibly hard to unwind. And it gets worse. Even if you're ready to spend the money, you might not even be able to get the planes because manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus are backed up for years. In some cases, close to a decade. So now you've got three problems. Buying is expensive, buying is slow, and buying is risky. Because what happens if demand drops? What happens if a recession hits? What happens if something like a global pandemic shuts down travel overnight? Now you're sitting on billions of dollars worth of aircraft with no passengers to fill them. That's not just bad, that's catastrophic. So airlines found a workaround. Instead of owning planes, they rent them. Simple as that. They sign long-term lease agreements, typically anywhere from 6 to 12 years. They pay a fixed monthly amount, often hundreds of thousands of dollars per aircraft. They operate the plane like it's their own, and when the lease ends, they give it back. No massive upfront investment, no long-term depreciation risk, no being stuck with outdated aircraft. It's the same logic as leasing a car. You drive it for a few years, return it, and upgrade. Except in this case, the car costs $100 million. Now, before you think this is some kind of loophole or shortcut, it's not. Leasing comes with strict conditions. These contracts are tight. Airlines can't just walk away halfway through because business is slow. They are locked in for the full term. They're also responsible for operating the aircraft. That means maintenance, crew, safety, scheduling, everything. In most cases, these are what's called dry leases. The airline gets the plane, but none of the extras. They handle everything else. So, from a passenger's perspective, nothing feels different. You still see the airline's logo, you still interact with their crew, but behind the scenes, the ownership is completely separate. And some airlines have taken this strategy to the extreme. One of the most interesting examples is IndiGo. When they launched in 2006, they started with nothing. No planes, no passengers, no legacy costs. And from day one, they made a decision. They would lease almost everything. They built their entire operation around one aircraft type, the Airbus A320 family. That meant simpler training, simpler maintenance, lower costs across the board. They would lease new planes, fly them while they were efficient, then return them before expensive maintenance cycles kicked in, then replace them with newer ones, repeat the process over and over. And it worked. They grew at a speed that most airlines can't even come close to matching. Hundreds of aircraft, tens of millions of passengers, all built on a model where they didn't need to own the most expensive part of the business. But not every airline follows this path. Some do the opposite. Take more established carriers, airlines with decades of history, strong balance sheets, and predictable demand. For them, owning planes can actually be cheaper over the long run. Yes, the upfront cost is massive, but over 20 or 25 years, ownership can reduce total expenses compared to leasing. So most major airlines do a mix. Some planes they own, some they lease. And that balance shifts depending on their strategy, growth, and financial position. But this brings us to a bigger question. If airlines are leasing all these planes, who are they leasing them from? Because someone has to own them. And the answer is an entire industry most people have never even heard of: aircraft leasing companies. These firms don't fly passengers, they don't sell tickets, they don't operate routes, they just own planes, thousands of them, and rent them out to airlines all over the world. Some of these companies have fleets larger than any airline on Earth. Not Delta, not Emirates, not United. Leasing companies. And here's where it gets even more interesting. A huge portion of this entire industry is based in one place: Dublin, Ireland. One city, one country, controlling a massive share of the world's aircraft. So why Ireland? It comes down to three things: money, simplicity, and global reach. Ireland built a system that made it extremely attractive for leasing companies to operate there. Lower corporate taxes, clear, standardized rules around aircraft ownership and depreciation, and most importantly, tax agreements with dozens of countries. What that means is airlines around the world can lease aircraft from Irish-based companies without getting hit with heavy extra taxes. And when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars per month, per plane, those savings add up fast. So the industry concentrated there, and once it did, it became the global hub. Now, let's talk about something people don't usually think about: responsibility. Because if an airline doesn't own the plane, what happens when something goes wrong? Who is accountable? And the answer is simple: the airline. Even if they don't own the aircraft, they operate it, they control it, so they carry the responsibility. They hold the insurance, they handle the fallout. The leasing company remains in the background. They own the asset, but they're not the ones flying it. And this setup reveals something important about the aviation industry. Airlines are the face, they're the brand, they're the experience you interact with, but they're not always the ones holding the most power. Because when things go bad, airlines take the hit. And when things go really bad, the owners still own the planes. You saw this clearly during COVID. Travel demand collapsed. Flights were grounded. Airlines were bleeding cash. Governments had to step in with massive bailouts just to keep them alive. But the leasing companies? They still had contracts. They still had assets. And in some cases, they had the legal right to take planes back if payments stopped. That's when it really became clear. Airlines weren't just operators. In many ways, they were tenants. But here's the twist. This system, as strange as it sounds, is actually what makes modern air travel possible. Because if every airline had to buy every plane outright, ticket prices would be significantly higher, growth would be slower, routes would be limited. Leasing allows airlines to scale faster, expand routes, and stay flexible. It allows new airlines to enter the market without needing billions up front. And it allows existing airlines to adapt when demand changes. So when you board a plane, look at the logo on the tail. That's the airline. That's who you're flying with. But behind that logo, there's a good chance someone else owns the aircraft entirely. And that invisible layer, that hidden financial system, might be the real engine keeping the entire industry in the air.